that the Bahais need to be open the way, you know, and free to express themselves about what all this is about, the way they understand it. I'm just doing this from my own personal point of view. Now, because I'm a person, undoubtedly, this may have offended quite a number of people, and it's possible it attracted quite a number of people, but we're still back at the same thing. And this is, you know, overcoming the insistent self. Like in the poetry of Ayatollah Khomeini, he laments the mosque and the indoctrinations in one of his poems. And he says he'd rather be like in a whiskey bar. Of course, it's a poem like Rumi. And what is he saying? Well, whiskey's forbidden and wine is forbidden. But wine has been used as the symbol for divine intoxication. So the Ayatollah is telling us that he's not interested in material affairs and all of these other problems, that he'd rather be for himself intoxicated in the whiskey or wine of the love of God. And this is what individuals want. And when a person tastes of this intoxication, they're attracted to this and they're converted to it and they're consecrated to it. And the way they carry that consecration out in the material realm is they're dedicated to a lifelong service of education and development and improving their profession and the work that they can do to improve humanity. The reason a person becomes a healer is they have a healing gift and they want to heal injured people. An agriculturist wants to feed the starving. A builder is making buildings of good quality that will last, that are environmentally beautiful, that house people so that they have a dry place to sleep. People who make clothes are doing this to clothe people. Everything we do where you can make money is really a service to other people. And people who are spiritual are not going to make a crappy product. They want to help people. Now, they might make an inexpensive product to get the product out to more people at once, and the more higher price products might be more expensive to make. But the goal is to get these things so that everybody can have access to them. So in order to do this, money is a good way to exchange things between us. But it says in the scriptures that the love of money is the root of all evil. When they go forth to just make money, well, and that's their goal, well, then they lose sight of the fact that they're growing the food to feed the starving. They're making clothes to clothe the naked. They're educating people in the school to educate the ignorant. It can't be money motivated in this. That no matter what job or profession that a person would choose to do in their life in order to support their family and their children and their community, it should be a living wage at the bottom line. There should be a minimum standard of living. Now, if people happen to get really wealthy and amass a lot of material things, they can still be spiritually detached from this, the way the Ayatollah said that he was detached and wished that he was God intoxicated and not dragged into the nasut of the materialism of all this. Once we're spiritual, it cannot be that difficult. Economy means to manage your house. To manage our household if we're all members of one house. Right now, it's a little bit tension here because we're at the cusp of the fulfillment of all this happening. All of the people of the world should be in favor of all of the things we've suggested tonight because they empower the individuals and the nations and cultures to govern themselves and to protect and preserve them. Right now, these cultures don't know how long they might last. Where's ancient Greece? Where's Rome? Look at the Pyramid of Egypt. These cultures are gone. Their languages aren't even spoken. Their religious texts are mostly unknown. So the people today want their culture and their families preserved. And the threat of international war is frightening the countries into wanting to arm themselves against these giant nations that are advancing their material civilization through economic or military means. When we say war is outlawed and we signed that contract in 1928, this meant economic war also. So, waging an economic war is just as much a violation as waging a conventional ground war. Now, especially when the economic war provokes the start of the ground war. So these other countries, like the civil war in Yemen and Sudan, these countries are toppled by corporate interests, and those corporations are run by people, and the governments have people in them, and these are the ones responsible for the violation of the 1928 peace covenant. But as citizens of these countries, even if we can't get them to change their behavior, or can't get our governments to stop the building of a dam or a building or a power plant or an oil well that's going to destroy the environment and harm the agriculturalists, at least we can, in our heart and in our soul, when we turn to God, not be in favor of it, and hopefully meet like-minded people that agree with us. And eventually, hopefully the government where we live will get enough power to stop the greedy individuals who, in the name of freedom, are polluting the world and making inferior products and only trying to profit for themselves, especially like the gas and the oil companies. So we have to have this detachment. So we should be attracted to the Spirit and our personal growth and development. And that means on a spiritual level, on an intellectual level, and on a material level, we should have this education. So it's not like some abstruse, mystical, unfathomable, abstract thing. It's about managing our affairs at the national and local level and internationally in such a way that good human beings can thrive and grow and make the nations and the cities and the world stronger by having the way and the means to express their true genius in the way that they understand it. Now, I've been through a series of highly educational experiences, beginning with entering the Baha'i school that was established, that Abdulbaha mentions, the International School of Science. They should be building a building for it at Mount Carmel. They never did that. But the school exists and continued, and we have it here in the Rocky Mountains in the United States. And I got to attend it from 1985 through 1996 when it was fully functioning in Missoula, Montana. Not everybody's had this opportunity to be educated. I'm just the product of education. That's all this is. I have a soul like everybody else. I have a physical body like everybody else. But when I was 19, I was attracted to the Spirit. I'm a very slow learner and a very slow developer. And eventually this deepened, and I became converted to it, of course. And I dedicated my life to this the way I understand it, that I was consecrated to it. And when these tests happen, Shoghi Effendi says, when we're affected by the things of this world and they kind of shake us up, or we're wavering, this shows we're not properly consecrated. So these tests happen, and it's a constant rededication to being attracted to God, converted to the Spirit, and being consecrated. Then a test comes, we're shaken. So we're attracted to God. So we deepen in God. We realize what the shaking was, and we let that go and discard that. And then we rededicate ourselves in conversion to a deeper conversion. It's deepening. And then we reconsecrate ourselves in the deepening. And this process continues every day ad infinitum, certainly while we're in this world. So if the people of the world had an opportunity to be exposed to the spiritual teachings from the source by turning to the manifestation of their origin, the founder of their revelation as they know it, they will advance greatly. So I have a Jewish background, and when I was 19, I accepted Jesus as a born-again Christian, and then went through experience there and found Bahaullah. And so my understanding of Bahaullah is like doing what he said. Once I recognized Bahaullah, he said that I should deepen in the religion of my origin. And I didn't know anything about my religion of origin because my ancestors come from the Ukraine, and they were under the veil of the communist empire, and they became atheistic later, although the matriarch of my family was a Baha'i, and I was happy to be raised in a Baha'i household. The other members of the family were kind of atheistic in this type of a way. So when I read Baha'u'llah said this, I was like, oh, so I began to deepen in my Jewish roots. And of course, Christianity, where Judaism is the root and Christianity is the branch, the Bahai Faith is the leaf, flower, and fruit of the same tree. So I understand Baha'u'llah like as King Messiah and other things, bringing Olam Haba to the earth now as it is in heaven and things like this. This is going to be different than a Hindu that might recognize Baha'u'llah as mentioned in their sacred tradition in scripture, or a Buddhist or an indigenous person, or a Muslim or a Protestant or Lutheran or Mormon. I mean, it's just going to be so much diversity. But nevertheless, the sun is shining and we all have this chance to become educated. And this is all this is an education. And when a person is deciding to be attracted to God and converted to the Spirit and consecrated to a lifelong education, eventually they're going to want their education to feed them, to provide spiritual food and a high rate of growth. And that's what we're seeing under the Baha'i covenant. For people who really want to grow fast and have excitement and the thrill of inner spiritual development and that intoxication the Ayatollah talked about, permanently imbued in their self, being a member of the Baha'is under the provisions of the covenant or in a community that's knowledgeable of the covenant is the greatest and quickest way to develop and accelerate. Many of these people that recognize the truth of the covenant of Baha'u'llah still remain in the Sans Guardian community, but they're converted, attracted, and consecrated, and they're doing the right thing. But they haven't gained a majority where if they elect a local council or spiritual assembly or a national assembly, that they're the majority that are aware of this. There's still this problem. And the same thing with the rest of the world. We have Jews and Christians and Muslims that absolutely recognize the revelation of Baha'u'llah and are promoting these principles in the name of Islam, Judaism, Christianity in their own indigenous communities. So we have no quarrel with anybody. This is a matter of education, plain and simple. The education we give is free of price. And we don't benefit from this in any way. We don't have any material possessions or monetary funds or lands, and we're not going to. But the people of the world will have these things. When the majority of the people recognize all this, that's when the majority of the people who are spiritual will take over the caretaking of the Baha'i properties and shrines in the Holy Land. And the managers of those holy estates will be accepted by the government that's there, which now is the state of Israel, and the Supreme Tribunal, and the other nations will agree that they're the legitimate managers of the holy properties. When Abdulbaha passed on, Muhammad Ali and the gang took the ownership of the properties away from Shoghi Effendi and had the keys to the shrines for some time. And he had to go to court in the state of Israel, where they used the will and testament as a legal document to work that out. By the time he won the rights back, he was killed, and the main Sans Guardian group took possession of the properties. So from the days of the passing of Baha'u'llah until today, none of the leadership of the Bahai Faith, firm in the covenant, ever possessed the holy properties. Abdulbaha was not allowed to visit his father in the Baji because Muhammad Ali's family controlled that whole building that whole time. And then Shoghi Effendi didn't have access to this. And then the Sans Guardians took it over and so forth. So this is a proof and an evidence of the truth of the succession of the Bahai Faith, is that it's nonviolent, meek, and mild and submissive, even to this extent that it allows the enemies to violate its rights and take it over. Unless the people of the world are going to rise up and say, you know, the Baha'is deserve to, you know, have their property disputes settled in a different way, you know, then there's not much we could do about it. Even if all the people woke up in the Baha'i world and realized where the true house of justice is, undoubtedly the same people that are caretaking the properties, now that their hearts belong to God, would still be able to maintain, you know, those properties. Me personally, I have absolutely no interest in anything from this place. The only thing that I have an interest in is using my body to vocalize this message so we can elect the Supreme Tribunal. Not obsessed by this, but it's our job as Bahais under the provisions of the covenant to keep the covenant and to continue the governance of the Bahai Faith through the covenant administration the way it's working. And we've been very, very successful in guiding the leaders of the world since we reestablished the IBC UHJ in 1991, all the way up till today. And now we're finally got to the age of fruition where the nation states, especially the ones indicated by the prophecies of the Christian Bible, should be able to be the four Christian nuclear superpowers to elect the Supreme Tribunal and settle their differences. If Russia and the United States are friends, and England and France and them are backing this up, well, then Israel and Iran are friends, and South Korea and North Korea are friends, and China and Taiwan are friends. You see how this works. So this is just going to work itself out. The paranoia and the prejudice and the suspicion and the insecurity and the fear and the uncertainty and the doubt all originate from not understanding reality. We're supposed to love reality. And the ultimately real is the source of the cause of causes. That is God, the creator of the universe. And we don't know anything about God in essence. We're just human beings that were given revelations from God. And now we're seeing, if God is saying, if we can cooperate and work together. The Bahais have an advantage. We have a named point of unity as an appointed successor of the covenant, along with the chosen successors that choose to accept it in our community. The people of the world in their other religions have the same point of unity. And in the secular world, they should at least have a common goal to be their point of unity, which is to elect the Supreme Tribunal so as civilized people, disputes between the nations can be settled in a court and citizens of the countries won't be subjected to war. On the other hand, if there's really an aggressive country that's breaking solely the international covenant and invading our country, then Abdulbaha says the Bahais would be the first one in the street with weapons to defend their town and to defend their borders from the attack of the enemy. So the Bahai faith is not pacifistic. It believes force should be the servant of justice. And it believes that justice is seeing the truth with our own eyes and not through the eyes of our neighbor. And seeing the truth can only come out in a court or a tribunal that investigates the facts and goes by fairness and these principles of justice and equality. And none of the other imitations of Baha'u'llah's peace program had that, including the UN or the headless House of Justice like the League and the Court. So we're looking forward to the people of the world becoming spiritually mature and electing the Supreme Tribunal. And we do believe it should happen at first between these four countries. England, France, the United States, and Russia. And you can bet your bottom dollar that if they solve this political problem and this nationalistic problem, then they will fix the agricultural environmental problem, the world health problem, and the free trade problem. And they will announce at some point that all sanctions are lifted from everybody that will reject this. And everybody will just, like when Hillary Clinton gave the Russians the reset button, it'll just be a reset. And we will see something brand new take place. This 100-year period is a transition. War was legal before 1928, and the old world empire building mentality is what gave us the great civilization we now have globally through the different nation states evolving. Italy was Rome that ruled the whole place. Now it's just one country with a great culture. France under Napoleon tried to gobble up everybody, and now France is inside its borders. Wonderful country. Russia has its borders. It should stay in its borders. And if it's a border dispute between Ukraine and Russia, that's another issue. If it's a threat by NATO expansion, where Russia needs to have the seaport in Sevastopol in Crimea and a land bridge up into their country through Mariupol and stuff, well, this is a fear-based response to economic warfare provocation, which in itself is wrong. if there's an argument between the United States and Russia, if there is, it's around the free and open society and the idea that God has endowed us with rights for freedom, for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the First Amendment. So when these countries get together, if they agree that whatever basic human rights are that they agree in, that God's endowed us with, and they agree upon this, it's still up to the different nation states how they want to implement that in their culture and in their society. We can't have one nation dictating to all the others to march to their tune. We're not going to have this. So my hope is that the Bahais will rededicate themselves to every provision of the Master's sacred will and testament, the way Shoghi Effendi suggests. And of course, we're a little leaven that leavens the whole lump, but there's strength in numbers. And the more people that are doing the crusade of the greater jihad against the insistent self to have become embodiments of the most great peace now, the faster the lesser peace will happen amongst the nations. And eventually the most great peace will happen for all the people of the world. But you can be sure that when the most great peace comes, it's probably going to be through the work of the succeeding manifestations of God. And the government of the Supreme Tribunal, which will eventually become a universal house of justice, with the Davidic king as the president, is going to be established for a 5,000 century cycle. The executive branch remains spiritual and educational. The nations will continue to elect the representatives. When we say universal house of justice, we mean every nation will be a member, not just some, but all of them, with an equal vote on this assembly. And it will effloresce into the universal house of justice. But it has to begin with a simple peace between England, France, the United States, and Russia, because that's what the prophecy says. This idea doesn't come from me or Bahaullah or abdulbaha. According to Bahaullah, it comes from God. And the prophecies of God tell us which countries are going to be the main players. And they are. It mentions Persia. It mentions Libya. It mentions Ethiopia. It mentions China. It mentions Russia, United States, England, and France. Many countries are named in the table of nations in the Bible that the prophets then use to talk about what would happen at the time when a descendant of David, seated upon the throne, unlike any of the other descendants of David on the throne, unique out of all of them, would be given a revelation direct from God so that we could elect the house of the Lord that all the nations would flow to and beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war no more. Our current world order and the nation state building was based on war and empire building. And that was good because it brought us to the point where there's no longer any place on earth that doesn't have a civilized administrative government anywhere. So the whole world's civilized. And as it's wrong to have any nation lord it over on the others, the nations are compelled to elect the Supreme Tribunal to manage their international affairs so they can remain independent yet interdependent to have a free and open global society. And that's where we're at right now. The old world order on empire building revolved around the military industrial complex. The industry includes news and entertainment stuff. So the military industrial complex is what it's saying that we're revolving around. And it says they'll beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. We have to switch from a global Qibli of the military industrial complex as an economic Qibli to an agricultural industrial system that's green and friendly. This is what it's saying: swords, plowshares, that's agriculture. It's saying that the Qibli of our global economy has to be agriculturally backboned. When this is sustained and people have security and safety of where to live and house and clothe, and they have opportunities to get educated, they have to have access to education. I'm fortunate. I had this access. I'm educated. So I'm articulate. Other people all people have to have this access from the time that they're children and not be brainwashed or indoctrinated and yelled at in church, synagogue, or mosque that they're going to burn in hell or they aren't doing these things right. Babies already have a soul. They're already connected with God. The educators should be allowing them to flourish and blossom in their own personal spirituality. Then swords will be beaten into plowshares because individuals will still compete with each other. It won't be like, look how tall the building is, look how big the dam is. It'll be like, hey, taste this fresh salsa I made at my garden out of tomatoes I grew. Oh, here's a hummus dish I made from chickpeas and garbanzos that it grew at my own farm. You know, people be proud of their food that they make, or the painting that they made, or an intellectual discovery, or a great gathering that a group of people had to celebrate humanity and praise God for existing in holy festivals or national holidays and things like this, and be rejoicing and exceedingly glad with one another. Nevertheless, the material world's still filled with death, sickness, disease, and trauma. That's never going to go away. Why would God create us and put us in a world of suffering, disease, and ignorance, and poverty, and war, and disasters? It's because we're here to remove those things by establishing peace, by establishing education, by comforting each other when we're crying or we're hurt, when we have the loss of a loved one. The family comes together even closer because they all experience the same loss of the same loved one. They will reunite with them in the other world. So we're here to comfort each other, to help each other, to be the caretakers of each other, to cooperate together. And by cooperate, I mean, again, like setting up a soccer stadium, creating the rules for soccer, agreeing on the rules. And then we can have a competition that's healthy in the cooperative framework we provided, because we like that. It's fun to have competition. It's not fun when empire building nation states are still killing each other. So this was the old way of thinking. When Baha'u'llah announced this, he was laughed at. They go, why would we want to eliminate war? It works. So after he came, we had the worst war ever, World War II, and we saw people ground up into by machines. That motivated people to outlaw war in 1928, which is what Baha'u'llah suggested. He also suggested we elect the Supreme Tribunal correctly. And this is the page that I hope all the Baha'is would be on. The Baha'is being able to sing the new song, the song of the International Covenant of Peace, harmoniously together. And it's the same as the Song of Moses, the Song of the Lamb mentioned in the book of Revelation, a blessing, a curse, and a regathering. That Moses said in his song, you'll come under the covenant, you'll become the greatest. You'll break the covenant, you'll be humiliated and abased. And then he promised they'd be regathered under the covenant again in the third part of his covenant. So we entered the 1928 covenant of peace. You can see how we violated it during 100 years. And now the 100 years are over. We're at the century of the regathering. God will extend his hand yet a second time to regather the people under the banner of the covenant. And the same thing with the Bahais. The Bahais received the covenant. They became great by the time Mason Remy and Shoghi Effendi were ready to establish the Universal House of Justice in 1951 and have it recognized by the State of Israel government in 1963. And then the successor of Mirza Yahya and Muhammad Ali, the successor to the insistent self, unfortunately, Ruia Khanum fell from grace and many people were misled. And we've seen the humiliation and the disgrace of the Baha'i community internationally. Whereas the people of the world during the ministries of Abdulbaha and Shoghi Effendi admired the Bahais, treated the Bahais with respect, even in the nation of Iran, because Abdulbaha and Shoghi Effendi guided them to be loyal to the government as a religious duty and to be kind to all. When the covenant was broken, now the Bahais are seen as a disgrace. They're no longer in a position of honor like they used to be. When Shoghi Effendi passed on in 1957, they announced this in Time magazine. That's how well known this was. Now the Baha'is barely got any mention in the press at all until recently, because of the activity that we've been doing behind the scenes has attracted more people to the general population of the Baha'i movement. The Baha'is are not to blame for this problem any more than the people of the world are to blame today for being in violation of the covenant of 1928. I've been talking to people, nobody knows about the covenant of 1928, not even scholars. They finally wrote a book about this in the year 2017 called The Internationalists, this book here. And it explains the importance of this 1928 Catalog-Briand Pact. If all the people of the world knew they were in violation of the covenant of 1928, as soon as they knew that, they would immediately come into conformity with it. I did. I found out about it on the day that Abdulbaha's shrine was on fire. So that was the big news of the week for me. See how God synchronizes these things? So now we have this 7-month time period from then and from February 24th to try to work this out. So we're pretty zealous, I guess, about trying to motivate the main leadership of the world to elect the Supreme Tribunal, because we're looking at the threat of 1 hour of nuclear war that would destroy every American city of a population of 100,000 or more in a strike between the US and Russia. And that's just a horrible disaster. Something to that extent is undoubtedly going to occur to motivate the people to elect the Supreme Tribunal, unless this thing in the Ukraine is motivation enough. So we're preparing a very important letter that's going to go out soon, hopefully in the next few weeks, that talks about the situation in the Ukraine and this 1928 covenant peace. It's my view that if a person is raised in a Baha'i household and they go back and reread the Kitabiyat and the Will and Testament, and they realize what the covenant is, and they want to become firm in this, they're going to have a dramatic emotional experience spiritually between them and God. Baha'u'llah says they have to use wisdom, hikmat, as they go through their evolution of the 10 stages of the soul, overcoming their insistent self, when they realize where the point of the Wali Amrullah is, Amr against the Nafs Amara, then they will go through this period of adjustment. They should do that quietly and in private. Once they've come into firmness of the covenant and consecrated themselves, they can then figure out how they can improve their community in the Sans Guardian realm, which is what thousands of us have been doing over the last 20 years. So the 144,000 of us are doing the best that we can. I don't have any followers or students. I'm the members of this community. I'm one of the members of this community. They're my fellow believers. And I wish that everybody would have this opportunity to get educated so that they can discover who they really are in the presence of God, the way they understand that, and actualize their true genius. And through the transcendence of this revelation of the most great name, win their stations and help bring the victory of God to all the people of the world, which is going to be peace on earth through justice. And justice will be made known in the court of the Supreme Tribunal when it comes to international affairs.
Thank you, Neal Chase, for your explanation. Thank you for the time that you gave us for our talk tonight. I'm happy that I had the chance to hear your point of view and your guidance to the Bahais of the Iran, Bahais under the provision of the covenant, and the Sans Guardian Bahais that can have the opportunity to hear you, to hear the voice of the God and hear the voice of the true Bahai faith. And I hope also, that we can meet next week.
Yeah, we will meet next week. Also, what I'd like to say is that my purpose and function when I talk like this, or I go about things in the way that I do, is to stimulate more discussion and more deepening and investigation for people. So this is not the view of like, this is the way it is, and then that's the answer, and there's no more discussion.
I see.
But the Supreme Tribunal is going to be like that. If the Supreme Tribunal is like, look, Russia, you're not allowed to cross the Ukraine border, well, there's no opinion there. That's the way it's going to be. You know what I'm saying? Or if, hey, you can't cross drill oil into Kuwait, or from Kuwait to Iraq, that's illegal. There's no discussion about that. And I'm going to be the first person to submit my will to the will of the Supreme Tribunal. So whoever's elected to it, because we need to eliminate war. How am I going to continue to publish the things I'm doing right now? Right now, we're publishing the 7 practices of personal spiritual practices, the 7 facets. If Denver gets nuked, if they nuke Denver, my writing and publication of things is going to cease immediately, and it won't restart until material things are stabilized. So yeah, I have a very selfish motive for wanting peace on earth and the Supreme Tribunal elected. I have a life to live. I have work that I need to do. You see what I mean? So this is why the Supreme Tribunal in the House is consuming our time and energy. And it is the most important human achievement of the 21st century. The 20th century's greatest achievement was making peace illegal and imitating the plan 4 times. This century's achievement will be electing it correctly. And that might take some while to do. And all we can do from the Baha'i point of view is suggest it. The people in leadership have to figure out how to do all that, like we said earlier. But yeah, I have a selfish motive. For instance, I'd like to visit Mashhad and see where the 8th Imam converted the Exilarch to accepting Jesus and Moses. I wouldn't want to go there unless I was welcomed by the government in the country. You know, I don't want to stir up any trouble. I'd like to go to my ancestral homelands in the Ukraine and Georgia and Manzandarin and that area, and then down to Fallujah, and then back over to see where the Talmud was done, and maybe visit Jerusalem and the holy sites, the shrines of all 12 imams, the fire temple of Shiz where Zoroaster was born, and things like this. But how can I do that when there's this ridiculous war and international religious prejudice and nationalism and other problems? So I have a selfish reason for this. I would like the Supreme Tribunal elected. I will obey its decisions absolutely, so I can visit my friends